Okay, good evening and welcome to tonight's program on Virginia State Parks Trail Quest. I'm Lorraine Moffa, Programming Coordinator for the Loudoun County Public Library and your host for the presentation. Type any questions or comments you have during the program in the chat box and I'll relay them to our presenter. It's my pleasure to introduce Jessica Bowser, a former fourth grade teacher and conservation advocate. Jessica launched the Virginia Outdoor Adventures podcast to share how outdoor recreation and ecotourism opportunities are close to home and available to everyone. She shares other people's outdoor stories and is frequently interviewed herself by newspapers, magazines, and television shows as an expert on Virginia outdoor recreation. She's a guest blogger for Virginia State Parks, Destination Virginia, and RVA on the Cheap, an avid hiker, cyclist, climber, backpacker, kayaker, photographer, and birder, and she earned the Virginia State Parks Master Hiker designation. Welcome, Jessica.
Thank you, Lorraine. It's so great to be here. Can I go ahead and jump right into it?
Absolutely.
All right. Welcome, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for participating and joining me tonight. If you have any questions, Lorraine has graciously agreed to monitor the chat box and to jump in to let me know if there are any questions. There will also be some time set aside at the end, and I will be providing you with my contact information at the end so that you know how to get in touch with me if you have questions after tonight. So my name is Jessica Bowser. As Lorraine said, I'm the host of Virginia Outdoor Adventures podcast, which is a show about outdoor recreation in Virginia. Uh-oh, presentation is stuck. Just a second, there we go. It seems to be a little slow and needs to warm up, so bear with me, folks. If you're looking for the podcast and you go to your podcast player and just type in Virginia Outdoor Adventures, you'll see this artwork pop up, and then you just click on it and you can start listening. So I'm going to talk to you tonight about Virginia State Park's Trail Quest program. And Trail Quest is a program that the state park started many years ago to encourage people to explore parks outside of their immediate neighborhood. So most people know where the closest Virginia State Park is to their home, but they may not have visited many other parks besides that. So Virginia State Parks created Trail Quest to encourage people to explore other places by providing a very small incentive program that is a lot of fun to participate in. The way it works is you go to the Virginia State Parks website and type in Trail Quest, and their page will come up where you will register for Trail Quest by entering your information. And then it's your responsibility to go back to that page every time you visit a new park and enter the information in. And the information is simply the park that you visited and the date that you visited that park. And as you do that, Virginia State Parks will send you pins in the mail. So after you visit your first state park, you'll earn this green pin that you see on your screen with a boot on it and the number 1, and that'll come in the mail. And then they will continue to send you these other pins when you have visited 5 parks, 10 parks, 20 parks. And then when you have visited all the state parks, you get the coveted Virginia Master Hiker pin, which is the large one that you see on the left side of the screen. And also, once you receive all those pins, they will also present you with a Master Hiker certificate, and you can either have it mailed to you or you can receive it from a ranger at any state park of your choice. And if you do that, there's usually photos, and the photos go up on their social media pages, and everybody celebrates, and it's really cool. So I completed Trail Quest back in 2020. Now, for me, it was a long journey. I started the journey in 2015. At that time, I was traveling around Virginia quite a bit for a leadership program that I was participating in. And I would see signs on the highway for different parks that I had never heard of before. And some of them had interesting names like Hungry Mother State Park, for example. And if I had time in my schedule, I would stop off and do some exploring. And pretty soon I realized that this would be a really cool bucket list project to take on. I didn't even know about Trail Quest at that time, but I knew that there were parks all over the state. And what I experienced at the parks were absolutely gorgeous and practically pristine landscapes. And because these parks are all over the state, they represent all of the landscapes in Virginia, from the mountains to the bay and everything in between. Really knowledgeable staff that's friendly and welcoming and want to make sure the visitors have an excellent experience, as well as lots of great amenities. Their cabins are fantastic. There are campgrounds, boat launches, and all kinds of other things. Some parks even have pools. It's really, it's a gem that we have here in Virginia. And so I started visiting all of the parks and finally completed in November of 2020 during COVID. And the last park that I visited was Holiday Lake. Now, at that time, there were 39 state parks in Virginia. There are now 41. So 2 more have been added, with Clinch River State Park down in Southwest Virginia and Machicomico on near Gloucester. Oh my gosh, I'm not saying that right. Gloucester, down on the peninsula, where they are celebrating our native cultures and of Indigenous people. So both parks are really great additions to the system. And I am going to take you through some of the parks that you will get to experience if you choose to do Trail Quest. So the first one, because I'm going to start with Holiday Lake, since that's the one where I completed Trail Quest. And you'll see on each one of these slides, there's a map of Virginia, and the initials that you're seeing on the map represent the parks. So if you look up in Northern Virginia where you see MN, that's Mason Neck State Park. And I'm going to put, or I have put, a red star on each park's location that I'm sharing on the slide, so that as you're looking at the pictures, you can also see where this park is located. So Holiday Lake State Park, I like to consider a gem of a park. It's in Appomattox, and it's one of the smallest parks. It's also one of the least visited parks, but I think it's absolutely gorgeous. It is on Holiday Lake, which is a lake near the Appomattox Forest, and it's very close to the mountains, so you've got mountains all around you. And there is lake access by boat, or there's a swimming area, fishing area. What's really neat about this park is that the water is exceptionally clean for Virginia. And so I've been told that when you're on a boat in the middle of the lake, you can see all the way to the bottom. Now, I have not done that yet because it was really cold when I visited, but I hope to go back and camp on their campground and do some paddling. There's a wonderful trail that goes all the way around the perimeter of the lake. I believe it's called the Lake Trail, and I think it's like 6 miles long, and it's just a gorgeous, gorgeous trail. So now I'm going to jump up and share some of the parks that are closest to us, starting with Mason Neck State Park. This is in Fairfax County, and it is on the Mason Neck Peninsula. I personally think this is one of the best places to catch a sunset in Northern Virginia. This is another hidden gem that, even though it's right in the middle of an urban area, a lot of people don't even know that it exists. But one of the things that it's on Gunston Cove, and one of the things that I think is really neat about Mason Neck is because it's on the cove, it attracts lots and lots of migrating waterfowl that come through here every spring and winter. But I think the most famous of all the migrating waterfowl are the Tundra Swans, which is the photo that you see on your right side. Tundra swans are really unique in that they spend most of the year in Alaska, and then when they migrate south, the entire tundra swan population splits into 3. 2 groups go down the west coast, and 1 group cuts diagonally all the way across the United States and comes here to Virginia. And they come to the same location every year, and you can see these tundra swans at Mason Neck. It's one of the best viewing locations for the tundra swans. So it's really an incredible journey that these birds take, and to think that they're right here in our backyard is awesome. So that should start happening. Well, migration is underway right now. The tundra swans should be in the area by December. So I would say mark your calendars for that. Just south of Mason Neck State Park, a little ways down 95 in Prince William County, is Leesylvania State Park, one of my favorite locations for fall leaf color in Northern Virginia. It is absolutely stunning in the fall. And this is also on the Potomac, just beyond the shore is Maryland. But this park has a really rich history. The indigenous cultures, this was a very important location for our indigenous cultures. But then also the property was owned in the 1700s by both the Lee family and the Fairfax family. And an interesting fact about Leesylvania is that it has one of the largest stands of old growth trees in Northern Virginia and in Virginia, I believe. I was told by a ranger who used to work at Leesylvania that because the property was owned by the Lee family and the Fairfax family, that they were able to stop any logging from going on here during the Reconstruction era after the Civil War. So where trees were being cut down to build railroads all across Virginia during that time, this is one of the areas that did not happen. So as you're hiking through the forest at Leesylvania, you will find many of these trees that are marked with a bluish greenish paint blaze like you see in this photo. And that means that the tree has been identified as having a circumference of larger than 10 feet, which I think is really neat. The other location where you can find really large trees is Caledon State Park. This is also on the Potomac, but a little farther south. Caledon State Park is really neat because there are these large cliffs that drop into the Potomac. And there are several areas all along the Potomac area as you start to go south where you'll see these large cliffs dropping off into the Potomac. The views are spectacular, and also a really great place for bird migration in the spring, and then some lots of really large trees that you likely won't find anywhere else. And a little bit farther down the Potomac is Westmoreland State Park. This is another example of these huge cliffs on the Potomac that I was describing earlier, but this is Fossil Beach. And Fossil Beach is popular with people who like to look for prehistoric fossils and shark teeth, fossilized shark teeth. This area was underwater during the prehistoric era, and so lots of fossils and shark teeth from Megalodon will wash up on the beach on occasion. So if you go down to the beach, sometimes you'll find one of those kitchen sieves or strainers sitting on the beach that somebody will leave behind, and then you can use that or bring your own to sift through the sand and possibly get lucky and find some shark teeth or some fossils. So Lake Anna State Park is a park near Northern Virginia that a lot of people don't know about. Most people have heard about Lake Anna and they're familiar with it as a tourist destination, but not everyone knows that there is a state park at Lake Anna. I personally think that this is a great option if you want to rent a cabin that's right on the water, but you don't want to spend the large amounts of money that are usually required to rent a cabin anywhere else around Lake Anna. All Virginia state parks are their cabin rentals are all very affordable. And just because this is on Lake Anna, it doesn't change that. So for the last couple of years, my friends and I have rented a cabin on the lake. What's nice about it is that if you want to rent a boat, which is a pretty popular activity at Lake Anna, you can rent a boat and dock it right in front of your cabin. Each of the waterfront cabins has a boat dock. So you can actually just park your boat right there next to your cabin. Now, the state park itself does not rent the boats, but there are plenty of other companies in the area that do. You can just conveniently park it there. Of course, there is a swimming. If you're not interested in boat rentals, that's fine. There's a swimming beach there. You can kayak or you can hike the trails or camp. So another one of my favorite parks that is not very far from Northern Virginia is Sky Meadows State Park. A lot of people have heard of this because it's a pretty popular destination. It's in Delaplane and it's right off of I-66 and it's surrounded by wineries, which is a little perk of this park because when you're done hiking for the day, you can just skip over to one of the wineries where they have outdoor fire pits and food trucks and all kinds of events and other fun things going on, or just big cozy fireplaces to snuggle up to at the end of your hike. So Sky Meadows is an interesting park. I like to think of the park as having two sides. Route 17 goes right through the middle of it and kind of splits it in half. The one side of the park is very mountainous. In fact, the Appalachian Trail passes right through this park. So when you think about the hikers who are going from Georgia to Maine or reverse, they're passing right through here. So it's very mountainous on one side. On the other side, though, it's more rolling hills. And the rolling hills are better for people who maybe aren't interested in really steep hikes, because some of the trails that go up the mountain are pretty steep. If you look at the photo on the right, this is taken from one of the overlooks at the very top of the mountain, which is sort of one of the most popular overlooks in the park because of this gorgeous view that you have. The photo on the left is of tree swallows in a bird box, which is on the other side of the park with the rolling hills. You'll also see a lot of cattle grazing at this park. The cattle are there to sort of maintain the fields. And so you will often see cattle and other birds that love this field. So you'll see like birds of prey and then bluebirds, for example, all in this area. Shenandoah River State Park is another hidden gem. Almost everybody knows about Shenandoah National Park. Not everybody has heard of Shenandoah River State Park, which is actually just up the street. So if you know where the north entrance of Shenandoah National Park is, think about going down that main highway about 6 more miles and you'll get to the entrance of Shenandoah River State Park. I like to think that this is slightly better location because you have a lot of the same mountainous trails, but without all of the crowds. So this is a great place to go camping. It's a great place for kayaking, and it's a great place for hiking. But one of my favorite things about this park is every spring, this park has what I think is one of the most impressive displays of Virginia bluebells, which is a native wildflower here in Virginia. And this is a photo of them. This flower loves riverbeds. And because the Bluebell Trail, which is what you're seeing in this photo, runs right next to the river, it cuts right through this huge grove of Virginia bluebells. I would say, though, if you want to go see the bluebells in the spring, first call the park ahead of time to find out when they're at peak. And then, in as much as you can, try to avoid weekends and, try to avoid weekends. If you can go during the day, on a weekday, that's your best bet, because this can feel like a crowded city sidewalk on a beautiful Saturday spring morning when the bluebells are in full bloom. Okay, so moving down now to Central Virginia, we have Highbridge Trail State Park. Highbridge Trail is unique because the trail itself is the park. So it's a little bit different than the typical park you might think of. But the focal point and sort of the most well-known aspect of this trail is the majestic High Bridge. This is something from the Civil War era that was rebuilt at one point. You can actually ride your bike all the way across the majestic High Bridge. So you'll see the photo on the right shows you what that looks like from the top. They have a couple of overlooks on the bridge. So I took this photo from one of the overlooks where I'm facing down the trail. If you're afraid of heights, I will warn you, this might not be the best experience for you. You can see the trail from the bottom as well. So if you would rather do it that way, that's the photo on the left. There is a trail that goes down to the bottom. There's a couple of picnic tables at the bottom, but you can be close to the river and see people passing up on the top. I will say this, I think the trail is about 30 miles long, if I remember correctly, and it passes right through the middle of the cute little town of Farmville, right down the middle of downtown. So if you wanted to make a day of it, you could definitely start or end, or even just stop in Farmville, get some food, walk up and down their main streets, maybe even visit campus, and then get back on the trail. So there are two trails trail parks in the Virginia State Park system. The second one is New River Trail, and this is down in Southwest Virginia. This is, I think, one of my favorite Virginia State parks. I get asked all the time what my favorite park is. It's really hard to say, but I would say this is probably close to the top because look at those views. This is so unique. This trail is just under 58 miles long. It runs from Galax to Pulaski, and the middle of the park is what's called the Foster Falls area. There is an old building that used to be an orphanage that they are currently converting into a bed and breakfast in that area. They also have canoe and kayak rentals there. Horseback riding, I believe, is still there. There's a gift shop and a visitor center in the Foster Falls area. But the best part of it is the shuttle service. So if you want to ride the trail, but you're thinking 58 miles is maybe a bit too much, you could take the shuttle. They will put your bikes on the van, and then you hop in the van, and they will drive you to either end of the trail and drop you off. From there, you ride back to the Foster Falls area in the middle of the trail. And if you want, you can do it all again, starting from the other side of the trail the next day. So that's the way I conquered this trail. So I went one direction one day and one direction the other, and that worked out really well. You get these gorgeous views of the New River, which is one of the few rivers that runs that runs south to north, which is really interesting. But you also have these gorgeous mountain views and several trestle bridges all along the way. There are bridges that go over the trail that are just absolutely stunning. This is a multi-use trail, so hiking, biking, horseback riding, and there's even a couple of very small primitive campgrounds along the way that are managed by the state park. Lots and lots of B&Bs and cabins that are privately owned but are for rent. Also down in Southwest Virginia is Hungry Mother State Park. This is actually the very first Virginia State Park, opened in 1936 with funding under the New Deal. This was built by the Civilian Conservation Corps, and it was just state parks were an idea back then. You know, we talk about our national parks being like our greatest idea, but at that time, state parks were as well. And so we didn't have any state parks in Virginia, but they decided to open Hungry Mother as an experiment. And back in the 1930s, the belief was that the average working man needed a place to take his family to recreate when he wasn't working. So that was kind of the thought process way back in the day. Old-fashioned thinking, but that's what got the park opened. And they announced that the park would be opening, expecting to have maybe 50 cars or so. And instead, they had hundreds and hundreds of cars that were lined up for miles waiting to get in on opening day. And so they realized they were onto something. And they went on to open 5 more state parks shortly afterwards. But Hungry Mother State Park has these gorgeous views of the mountains. I love to show these 2 pictures, one taken from, well, they're both taken from the same overlook, one in the winter, one this time of year, actually in September. And the reason I like to show this photo is because oftentimes people think that outdoor recreation is a warm weather activity. And I like to encourage people to think outside of 3 seasons and consider winter as possibly one of the best seasons, especially for hiking. And the reason why, actually, there's lots of reasons. First of all, you're not going to run into crowds. You very well may have the trails all to yourself, which I personally think makes the experience magical. But also you can see things in the winter when the foliage has dropped from the trees and has died back or is dormant that you don't see any other time of the year. We have a really fascinating history here in Virginia of different people who have lived on our land during different times, and you can still find evidence of people living on the land when you're hiking on these trails in the forest, but oftentimes you don't see it when it's all grown in. It's when the leaves have dropped that you can see cemeteries, old headstones, foundations for homes, chimneys, old roads. You might even find an old hunting stand or even an old evidence of, at that time, some illegal alcohol being made back in the woods. I mean, it's really fascinating what you can find. So in addition to what you can see when there's no leaves on the trees, you don't have to worry about heat stroke, thunderstorms, biting insects, all of the things that can happen, dehydration, or at least not as much dehydration. You should be drinking water any time of the year, but not nearly as much as you would in the summer. So there's lots of advantages to hiking in the winter. So down in Southwest Virginia, there is a very special park called Grayson Highlands. This is probably one of the more popular parks in Virginia. And the reason why is because, first of all, look at these gorgeous views. They're absolutely stunning. But also from here, there is access to the George Washington National Forest, which will take you to Mount Rogers. Mount Rogers is the highest peak in Virginia. There's a very unique ecosystem at the top. It's actually a rainforest. Most people don't know that. But once you step into it, you understand. It's sort of like stepping into the Emerald City. It's very wet up there, and so everything is green. Every rock, every log, everything is covered with something growing that is green. It's really cool up there. But also, in addition to access to Mount Rogers, the park itself is what they call highlands, which is why the park is named Grayson Highlands. And the park is at an elevation that is so high that deciduous trees won't grow here. So you might look around at the mountains and see them covered in trees, but the park itself is actually wide open, like you see here in the photos, with a lot of rocks and a lot of boulders. It's a really neat landscape that you won't find in too many other places in Virginia. There's also waterfalls in the park and some hikes to some pretty epic views. But one of the things that the park is most known for is its wild pony population. I do have to say, with a little disclosure, that it is perfectly fine to go visit the wild ponies, but they ask that you don't feed them and you don't pet them. I frequently see people feeding and petting the ponies, and it makes me cringe because we all know you shouldn't be feeding wildlife. But they're beautiful animals. They are very easy to find. If you just show up to Grayson Highlands and start walking on a trail, chances are you're going to find them. They love to hang out around the trail, and it's a really cool experience to see them there. All right, so I'm going to check the time real quick. Okay, we're making good time. So Natural Tunnel State Park is down in Southwest Virginia as well. This is one of the gateways to the West. It is it's a natural phenomenon formed by a river that has actually naturally carved its way out of the mountain, creating this natural tunnel. Now, back in the late 1700s, early 1800s, when westward expansion was happening, there were settlers in the Virginia area who wanted to move west for land. And so the only way to go west was either to go up and over the mountains, or to pass through the Cumberland Gap, or then there was this way, which was through the tunnel. And so people kind of saw this tunnel as, the world beyond the tunnel. Nobody knew what was on the other side of the tunnel. It was a scary place. Nobody knew what to expect, but they knew that this was the way forward, or at least they felt that they had better opportunities if they crossed through the tunnel to move west to get land. So the whole area around Natural Tunnel State Park has a lot of history where people would come to here knowing that they were going to pass through the tunnel, but would stop and would stock up on supplies, write letters home and do all the last minute things they needed to do before passing through the tunnel where they didn't know what was going to happen next. So it's really interesting. Now there is a railroad track that passes through this tunnel. It is an active railroad track. So if you're there at the right time, you might actually see the train pass through the tunnel. You can view the tunnel from several different vantage points that are high up, or you can take the stairs. There's even a gondola that goes all the way to the bottom. So you can ride what looks like a ski lift to the bottom, the floor near the base of the tunnel, and then take this little walkway to the viewing point. I like to show people this picture. It's really difficult to get a real idea of how huge this tunnel is. I can tell you that I tried to take a picture, and even with my wide angle lens, I couldn't fit the whole thing. But this will give you a little bit of an idea. If you look at the bottom of the photo, you can see some people walking along the edge of the railroad track, and just to see how tiny they look compared to the rest of this tunnel. Honestly, the first time I laid eyes on it, it was jaw-dropping. So it's just an amazing, amazing phenomenon. It's considered not one of the 7 natural wonders of the world, but the 8th, or at least that's what we like to say here in Virginia. Another natural wonder or phenomenon, whatever you'd like to call it, is Natural Bridge State Park. This one's a little better known because it's a lot easier to access. It's right off of I-81, maybe 5 minutes off the freeway. But this natural tunnel has changed hands over the years multiple times. Supposedly George Washington was here. Supposedly Thomas Jefferson owned it once, but now it is owned by Virginia State Parks. It's not just the tunnel that people come to see. There's also a waterfall here. There is a cave here. And it has also recently been designated a International Dark Sky certified location. So the park is now giving tours. I believe you hop on like a wagon and they take you out to a field where they have somebody who gives informational talks about dark skies, and then there are viewing opportunities as well. So they have telescopes set up and you can actually view the skies through the park. Through the telescope. So this is a really popular activity since they've added it, and several other parks have been dark sky certified. They're getting tons and tons of visitors. So if this is something that you think you'd like to do, make sure you get on the park's calendar and check to see when those offerings are, and call the park to see if you need to make a reservation, because it does fill up quickly. And then Breaks Interstate Park is exceptionally unique. It is an interstate park, meaning that it is right on the Virginia and the Kentucky border. And part of the park is in Virginia, part of the park is in Kentucky, and the 2 states share the funding responsibility for this park. So the funding is usually has to be fundraised or has to come from special designations from the Virginia General Assembly, separate from what the rest of the Virginia State Park system gets. So this is nicknamed the Grand Canyon of the South, and you can see why from this photo. It kind of does resemble the actual Grand Canyon National Park in Arizona. It's a little bit smaller and it's covered in trees rather than being red rock, but it does very much look like the Grand Canyon. So visitors come from all over the world to see this park. It actually draws people from all over the world, and it's a wonderful place for lots of different activities, not just for viewing the awesome canyon. But one of the other activities that people love to go to Breaks for is to see the elk. And if you haven't seen or heard of the elk, there was an article just recently, I think it was in the Washington Post, maybe a week or 2 ago, about the reintroduction of the elk herd. So the elk used to be native here in Virginia, but were hunted to extinction in the 1800s. And then the Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources purchased some property in Southwest Virginia in Grundy, which is Buchanan County, near the park, not in the park, but near the park, and reintroduced the elk herd. So this was several years ago, and the elk have been breeding and have now grown to a pretty large population. And there is a tour that you can take, a bus tour from Breaks Park to where the elk are living, and you can actually view them from there. They have these beautiful viewing platforms that they've built for visitors, where you can safely see them from a distance. Sometimes the elk come right up to the bus. Now, you're not allowed to get off the bus when the elk are nearby, but as long as the elk are at a safe distance, you're allowed to get off the bus and take pictures and, view them with, I would recommend bringing binoculars or whatever else you'd like to bring. The tour bus driver is very knowledgeable about the elk and can answer all the questions that you have about them. Personally, this is my favorite time of the year because they're breeding at the moment. So if you've ever heard a male elk bugle, it will give you goosebumps. So this is the time to go here and witness the elk when they have their giant antlers and when they're bugling. And also check out the colors behind this big guy. This time of year when the leaves are changing colors and the elk have their huge antlers, it's prime photo opportunity as well. And there's a couple more photos of them, so you can kind of have an idea of what you might see. The photo on the left was taken from the bus. I just shot the photo through the window, so the elk was pretty close by, but we weren't allowed to get off because the males are very territorial and they protect the herd. And then on the right, that photo was taken from the viewing platform. Okay, I'm going to end the presentation today by introducing you to two other parks that are on the complete opposite end of Virginia. This is in Virginia Beach. First Landing State Park is the most visited of all the parks and state parks in Virginia, mostly because it's in a populated area. It is literally in the middle of Virginia Beach, very easy to get to. But what's really cool about this park are these the swamps that they have here. You cannot find these any farther north than right here in Virginia Beach. So what's really neat about this is you've got the bald cypress trees, and with the bald cypress trees, you have Spanish moss growing from the bald cypress trees. And so you have this swamp it's fresh water, believe it or not, even though it's so close to the bay and the ocean. The park itself does have a beach on the bay. It is literally where the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay opens to the Atlantic. So it might as well be the Atlantic. It's that close. So you could go, if you go to this park, you can either enjoy the beach or you can enjoy the trails that go through the cypress swamp. If you're there in the winter, make sure you look for the rainbow swamp, which is a phenomenon that occurs when the tannins in the water release chemicals, or let me start over. The leaves from the bald cypress trees drop into the water, and then a chemical reaction happens with the tannins that cause the surface of the water to look like there's a rainbow on it. So it's really, really neat. It happens in the winter because the leaves have to drop from the trees for that to happen. So if you do go, make sure you keep an eye out for the rainbow swamp. And then the last park I'm going to share with you is Falls Cape State Park. While this park is also in Virginia Beach, it is the least visited of all the state parks in Virginia. So you go from the most to the least in the same city. And the reason why this is the least visited is because it is farther south of the most populated area, the boardwalk area that you probably know well, a little bit farther south, but also you have to pass through Back Bay National Wildlife Refuge to get to this park. And because Back Bay is an area where there are a lot of birds, migrating birds that stop to breed, there is no vehicle traffic that is allowed to pass through there. So you can go down the road, but you can't do it in your car. You can do it on foot, you can do it by bike, or if you're really adventurous, you can get in a canoe or a kayak and you can paddle into the park. So, and people do that. Those are the options. The final option, if you are, if you're not going to do one of those three, is there are certain times of the year tram tours of the park. So if you're interested in a tram tour, you definitely want to get on the park's website and check to see when those are and call the park and sign up. But they will pick you up on a bus outside the park, drive you through the refuge, and then into Falls Cape. What you see here is it's a globally rare ecosystem in the park. These are live oak trees, which you will find growing near the ocean. They are, and this park is on the Atlantic Ocean. What's so cool about these trees is that their branches twist and turn in all these interesting directions because of all of the weather and the wind that is constantly coming off the ocean. So it bends them and manipulates them in different ways. There's also primitive campsites at Falls Cape where the campsites are actually underneath these trees, which is really neat. So you've got the beach, and then next to the beach you have sand dunes. And then next to sand dunes, you have the live oaks. And the live oaks will not grow any taller than the sand dunes because they don't like to get hit by that weather. So it feels like almost like you're in a tunnel when you're camping in that area. It's all primitive camping. There's an outdoor shower and a water pump and an outhouse. But other than that, there's nothing else there. You can camp on the beach, and you can camp underneath these live oaks. So those are some really neat options that attract a lot of people who want something primitive. They don't want, the typical campground where there's, lots of people and big bathhouses and all the things that you would normally expect to find. This is all primitive camping. but it is a very unique experience. This photo here I took while I was primitive camping on the beach. This is a juvenile humpback whale that washed up on the beach. Because this state park doesn't get a whole lot of tourists, and because it is protected by Back Bay National Wildlife Refuge, what washes up on the beach tends to stay on the beach. And that included, in this particular case, this juvenile humpback whale. So the biologists had come and they had taken some samples to try to figure out, why the whale had washed up. But once they were done with their sampling, they left it there to decompose like it would naturally. And so the whale here is decomposing. It was actually sitting in a kind of a bloody puddle, I guess you could say, and the sun had just set behind the dunes, and the water was reflecting the colors in the sky as well as the blood. But I actually thought it was really neat. Where else are you going to get to see something like this? Once the whale completely decomposed, they moved the skull to the visitor center, and it's now on display in front of the visitor center. So if you do find yourself at this park, either on a tram tour or otherwise, make sure you stop by the visitor center and check out the skull of this whale. So if you have any questions for me, I'm going to take some questions now, but if you want to connect with me after tonight, this is how you can do it. You can find me on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter. These are all the podcasts, social media pages, but I'm very easily accessible through there. So you can message me there or comment. I'm very quick to respond. You can also email me at jessica@virginiaoutdooradventures.com. And if you're just looking for a resource for more information about state parks or other outdoor recreation opportunities around the state, you can always check out the podcast at virginiaoutdooradventures.com. Thank you so much. Lorraine, are there questions that I can answer?
Thank you so much, Jessica. That was fascinating. I had no idea there were that many beautiful parks in Virginia. Thank you. Before I get to the questions, I do want everybody to know that Virginia State Parks does provide some passes that you can check out through Loudoun County Public Library. So you can attend some of these parks for free by checking out those passes. So please speak to your librarian about that. And we also have books in the library about hiking in Virginia. So first question, just thanks so much. There was another question that came in earlier. Can you go back? Some people signed on a little bit late and they didn't hear about the Trail Quest badge.
Sure.
Can you go back to that slide and tell us how you earn that badge?
No problem.
You have to hike every single trail or just some of them?
Luckily, no. So no, you do not need to hike every single trail. In fact, you don't have to hike any trail. You just have to visit the location. So the way to sign up for Trail Quest is to go to the Virginia State Parks webpage and type in Trail Quest, and their page will come up where you enter your information, like your name, your address, so they know where to mail your pins. And then it is your responsibility to go back to that page every time you visit another park and enter the park you visited and the date when you visited. And so their system will keep track of that. And once you visit your first park, you receive a pin, and then you continue to receive pins after 5 parks, 10 parks, 20 parks, and then you can earn the coveted Virginia Master Hiker pin once you have visited all 41 state parks. And then I'll also add that you will get a certificate at the end, your Master Hiker certificate, and you can either have it mailed to you or you can opt to have a ranger present it to you at any park of your choice.
Oh, that would be fun.
It is fun.
Yeah, thank you. Are there state parks around Norfolk? If so, which one do you recommend the most?
So the closest parks around Norfolk are going to be the two in Virginia Beach that I mentioned. So First Landing and False Cape. The next closest one would probably be, let me think. Actually, I'm going to go forward to the map here to help me remember. Chapokes Plantation, that's the one I was thinking of. Chapokes Plantation is not too far away, or if you don't mind jumping on the freeway and driving a little ways, York River is also a really cool one. And York River also has fossils. In fact, a friend of mine who's a ranger there found a megalodon tooth the size of her hand on the beach a couple of winters ago. So if you're on the search for fossils, usually after a storm, is best, or even in winter when there haven't been a lot of people there for a while and things have had a chance to wash up but haven't been picked over just yet. It's also a great location for kayaking.
Most of these parks have rangers that will give tours.
Yeah, so the way most of the parks are set up is there's a calendar of events online, and you can see what kind of ranger programs are being offered. Now, if you just show up and they're not expecting you and you want to tour the park, that probably won't happen. Just because the parks are really on junction is not all working, but if there's nobody else there, you know, rangers are happy to talk to you, or otherwise I would say definitely check the calendar of events.
Okay. And yeah. Hold on one second, let me just read this question. Okay, you mentioned with one state park, I think it was the Natural Bridge, that you had to make reservations. Is that true for most of them?
Not necessarily. It really depends on how popular the program is. So for most ranger-led programs, you can just show up. It's not a problem. For something really popular like the dark sky viewing, because it's new and it's just proven to be something that people are really interested in, that you probably should call ahead for.
Okay. But if you're not doing a ranger program, you're just gonna visit the state park.
Just show up.
Yeah, just show up.
Yeah,
Okay.
just show up.
Questions? You want to put your contact information up again one more time, Jessica, please?
Sure.
Just beautiful. Do you visit these parks in the winter?
Absolutely. It's my favorite time to go. The cabins are, they have an off-season rate. So you can get cabins for like dirt cheap, honestly. Like some of the smaller cabins are $80, $90 a night. Like where are you going to get a cabin with a full kitchen and a fireplace and a deck and a fire pit and bedrooms and all of that for $80 or $90 a night? It's a steal.
Did you say it's legal to tent camp in the state park?
As long as you're on a campground, yes.
And one more question. Someone said they love to hike, but they're concerned about ticks. Any advice about that?
Yeah, that is a completely legitimate concern because as things are getting warmer and our winters are not as cold as they used to be, the ticks are not dying off like they should. So they come back with a vengeance every spring and it's getting worse and worse every year. So obviously long pants and long shirts are important, but checking yourself is probably the most important thing. It's really hard to prevent ticks 100%. For me personally, I know a lot of people use bug spray. I have found that bug sprays don't really work. And then there are chemicals in the bug sprays that are not good for you. So, you know, anybody can do whatever they want. For me personally, I don't like to use the bug spray. I would prefer long pants and long sleeves, but there's really no way to 100% ensure that you're not going to pick up a tick. So it is so imperative that you check yourself as soon as you get home. You know, get yourself a small mirror or like a magnifying mirror, a friend, a family member, somebody who can help you, and just make sure you're being really diligent about that. And if you do find one on you, don't panic. And it usually takes 2 to 3 days to transmit any sort of a disease such as Lyme's. So as long as you catch it early and you pluck it and clean the area, then you should be okay.
What safety advice do you have for female travelers?
Great question. So my experience in Virginia, luckily, has been that people are very friendly and the state parks are very safe. If you talk to the rangers, there's really not a lot of crime in the parks, which is great. And the crimes that happen are usually things being taken out of cars and stuff that happens in the parking lots, not necessarily things that happen on the trails. So I feel very safe in the area, but just to make sure, I always have a map with me. There are paper maps available at every park, but there's something new that Virginia State Parks has now. They have partnered up with the Avenza app, which is Avenza, the Avenza app. If you download it to your phone, you can then upload every single map that is for every park in in Virginia. And from there, you can, because it's satellite, it's satellite, you can actually see where you are on the map. So I think it's more useful than the paper maps where you have to guess where you are. But if you're using the map that's on the app, you can actually see where you are. So you're less likely to get lost. But then also always tell somebody where you're going to be anyway. Luckily, most of the parks are small, so if you were to get lost, it's, you're not out in the backcountry somewhere where something really serious could happen. But a couple of parks are, like, think about Grayson Highlands and all the trails that connect through there into the George Washington National Forest. So just be aware of where you're going and what you're getting into and what your ability level is, and make sure somebody always knows where you are, when you plan to be back, and what the plan is if you don't come back or they don't hear from you at the time that you have decided you will be back and be in touch. So, and also know that some parks have very limited cell service. So Douthit State Park, which is very close to the West Virginia border, has very, very poor cell service, or very splotchy. So if you're going to be hiking there, even if it means stopping into the visitor center or the park office and telling the rangers where you're going, then they can know to keep an eye out for you.
Don't necessarily rely on that app, right? Because you don't know if you're going to be able to use your phone.
Yeah, never rely on one thing only. Always have at least two things, that you can use.
Questions? Okay, well, thank you so much, Jessica, for coming out and telling us about these great places. And I don't know about everybody else, but I'm going to get hiking.
Thank you so much for having me, Lorraine. I appreciate it. Hope to hear from everybody soon. Feel free to reach out to me. I'm always available, and adventure on.